Welcome to the second Bruegel Financial Times debate ahead of the 2024 European elections. My name is Maria Demeritis. I'm a senior fellow at Bruegel. And together with Henry Foy, who is the Brussels bureau chief for the Financial Times, we will be hosting this debate this afternoon. In the run-up to the elections, today, perhaps more than ever, it is absolutely essential to provide clear, informative, and concise ideas for the future of the European economy. That is why we have invited candidates running for the position of President of the European Commission to present their vision on how to tackle the economic challenges that Europe faces today and no doubt will face in the next 5 years. We are very happy to see so many of you coming here in person to join us, but also the many of you that are following online. We encourage you to bring this debate to the social media by using the hashtag #ChoicesForEU on your favorite platform. And of course, we are particularly happy to welcome the representatives that each party has chosen to send to this debate. Let me very briefly introduce you. We have with us today Ursula von der Leyen, lead candidate for the European People's Party, Nicola Schmidt, lead candidate for the Party of European Socialists, Sandra Gozzi, lead candidate for Renew Europe Now, and Andres Vistisen, lead candidate for Identity and Democracy Party. We look very much forward to hearing what your economic plans for the EU are and why you believe that yours are the best. Henry.
Thank you so much. Before we get started, let me briefly outline the choreography and tell you all the rules of the debate. The discussion will be divided into three rounds, focusing on the following topics: competitiveness and the single market, economic security, and the EU budget. Each round will begin with a main question, and you'll have 90 seconds to answer that. After that, we'll ask individual follow-up questions and allow you to respond to any comments directed at you. For that, you'll have 45 seconds. Finally, we'll wrap up the debate with closing remarks to give everyone the opportunity to touch on any subjects you may not have had the chance to talk about. The speaking order was decided by random draw, and we will rotate it in each round. I also want to let the audience know that they too can participate in answering 3 questions related to the main topics posed to the speakers. Please join us on Slido using the code #ChoicesForEU. Let's begin with the first round. Here we will focus on the topic of competitiveness and the single market. But before we hear from our speakers, we have a question for the audience to hear what they think of the topic. This is available for you on Slido. We're asking, what's, in your opinion, the most valuable aspect of the single market today? Is it labor mobility, capital mobility, product and service market integration, enhancing research, innovation, and education, or finally, there is nothing valuable about the single market? Okay, we'll check back on that poll after we've heard from our speakers.
Okay, we are coming back now to the candidates for their thoughts on this country. This time, the question addressed to you is, the EU economy has been outpaced by the US and other countries over the past decade. Is the single market broken? And if yes, how do we fix it? Mr. Gozzi, we start with you, your 90 seconds.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Of course, the single market is the biggest liberal success that you might find in Europe. And we want more of that. We want more of the single market. We want a single market on energy. We want a single market on telecoms. We want a single market on data, on financial services. And we want to introduce a EU business code. We want to be able to create one start in one country, and the exact day the startup is able to operate all over the single market. This is what we have to do. We have to have a real SME reflex, not like the outgoing Commission, if you allow me to say so, because we really want to adapt our single market to the need of the 98% of our economy, which is small and medium businesses. And we want also to allow 150 million citizens to fully benefit from the single market. There are 150 million European citizens that do not benefit from the single market, are those who live along internal borders, which is crazy. But in the internal borders, you meet obstacles that you cannot dismantle. These, according to the Commission, I want to say to the 2 members of the Commission, cost each year 457 billion and cost 4 million jobs. If we dismantle these cross-border obstacles, you would have 1 million jobs created, according to the Commission of the European Parliament, and a growth of 123 billion. It is created after 30 years. We still have internal borders, as it is created that the funding in the market, but the EU is nowhere. We haven't created a capital market union. We haven't created a union of saving and investment. The private saving go to Wall Street, and this certainly must be a high priority for the new term, and we have to be really free to carry our research, explore, innovative, educated, wherever you want in the single market. This is something that we say, but we don't do it, and these are our priorities as Renew Europe.
Thank you, Mr. Gotze. For 90 seconds, Mr. Schmidt, 90 seconds are yours.
Thank you. Well, the single market is certainly not broken, but it's unfinished. So we have to give it its full potential and to adapt it to the new challenges. And the new challenges are huge. But as the law said, you do not fall in love with the market. So I think what we have to do is also put aside the market the right policies. Social policies are important, especially to include citizens. That's fundamental because we have to build a consensus around the single market. We have to have a strong industrial policy to, again, get the full potential out of the market. And we have to push innovation, R&D. So LETA gives us a lot of good ideas in that respect. Now, just to summarize, the law had 3 formulas. First, solidarity. That's fundamental for Europe. We need this solidarity between regions. We need it between member states. We need it also between citizens. Then cooperation. Well, we will not face the challenges if we have not the capacity to develop cooperation, including also cooperation in developing strategic sectors, and especially also at the financial level. We have to mobilize more capital to invest in the private and also in public infrastructure. And finally, competition. But competition is not just between Europeans. We have to situate competition in the global context, because since the law, the global economy has changed, and we have to have in mind what global competition means for Europeans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schmidt. Then I go to Mr. Vistisen.
The European economy is fundamentally broken. Over the last 50 years, our growth has been half of the one we have seen in the US. And the explanation for that is quite simple. They roll out the red carpet, you roll out the red tape. Read my lips. We need a stop for taxation, regulation, and bureaucracy for the next 5 years mandate. This era of mass regulation must come to an end. But we have to go further. We have to abolish harmful directives, such as the GDPR directive, the Working Time Directive, the Vogue CSR Directive, and other job-killing legislation. In Denmark alone, bad legislation annually puts an extra burden on business on 4 billion euros a year. That is a multitude when we look European-wide. And on top of this comes the so-called Green Deal. We cannot revitalize European economy if we don't abolish that piece of legislation that is basically the worst piece of self-harm ever created in the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Henry. We had Mr. von der Leyen.
Thank you so much. On competitiveness and the single market and comparing to the United States and China, I think we should start by look at our strengths. So we have less inequality than the US and China. We have better access to education, independent of the wallet of your parents. We have less CO2 emissions. We have better infrastructure. And actually, we have a longer life expectancy. So that's good. But of course, we have to do our homework. And there are 5 points I want to mention. The first one is we need better access to capital for our companies. In other words, the capital market union has to be completed. Second point is we have to further lower the energy costs in the European Union. That is deployment of renewable energy, because this is not only good for the climate, but it's also good for our independence. They are homegrown good jobs. The third element is better skills. We need to bring every young person either in vocational training or in work. We need a better reconciliation of work and family. There are so many highly qualified women out there who would like to work more, but it's impossible because the infrastructure, good childcare, is not there. And then we need a push on strategic technologies. These are clean technologies. This is AI and quantum. This is biotechnologies. And last, but certainly not least, the biggest productivity machine we have is the single market itself. So we have to deepen and to widen it. And this is not only new rules, but it is also enforcement and implementation of the existing rules.
Thank you very much.
I'm struck by how 3 of the 4 of you talked about deepening access to capital. We've seen for years and years and years now the Capital Market Union failing to come to fruition despite the best efforts of policymakers. If you were appointed Commission President after these elections, how would you force the countries to be differently this time and actually set up a Capital Markets Union? Mr. Schmidt.
Well, I think we all agree about the importance of a more unified capital market. We need common rules, otherwise we will not be able to foster investments over the borders in Europe. Now, I think this is something which has started now in the discussion, and we really have to push for achievements here. I know very well that there are objections, but these objections are not really reasonable, and they are not really up to the reality and to the point. So I think we have really to work hard to create this capital market union and to show that at the end, this capital market union is at the benefit for all, including those who might be a bit more reluctant.
Thank you, sir. Ms. von der Leyen, Mr. Gozi, you also said that. I mean, Mr. Schmidt there just said that he thinks it's unreasonable, some of these opposition points that are raised by the member states. Would you agree?
You're talking about the Capital Markets Union.
Indeed.
Yes. Well, we had a very good move forward in the last European Council. Strong conclusions, strong tasking of the finance ministers. They have to do their job now. It's basically the question of surveillance. How is the governance of the surveillance? So this has to be solved. But if we complete the Capital Markets Union, it's 470 billion euros in addition for investment in the European Union. So let's work on that.
Mr. Gozi.
Well, I was saying the single market is the biggest liberal success. I would say that the Capital Market Union is the biggest EPP failure because we have been in charge for 5 years. I mean, Dombrovskis comes from EPP, McGuinness comes from EPP. You tell us, Mrs. von der Leyen, that the last European Council did a good step ahead. Well, too little, too late. You have been in charge for 5 years, and you haven't seen a real push from the European Commission to go toward that direction. So I would think that, first of all, we have to demonstrate that we have a real political will. And our idea of the European Commission is renewed that we will put all our political capital to really move ahead in this field.
But if I may just at this point, Mr. Gossi, what is the one thing you would do to advance the CMU agenda?
Well, first of all, you have to make it a real priority, and you have to see how to combine the different, the opposition that there are. I mean, there are people who want a lot of surveillance, and sometimes too intrusive. There are other people who want only insurance, like the insurance deposit schemes, and it is clear that both have to take a step forward, but you need a mediator, you need an honest broker. If you simply take stock of the fact that the Northern Europe wants only strong surveillance, and the Southern Europe is only interested about insurance deposit schemes, you won't go very far. This is exactly what the European Commission must do: build up compromise and shape a compromise. And I think that on this Commission has failed.
Yeah, if I may also ask the same question, Mr. Vistesen, you have argued against any red tape, but are you in favor of creating a capital market union in the EU and therefore more regulation?
No, I would say that the fundamental problem is that we corrected after the US financial crisis in the late tenors of this millennia. And what we are seeing now is that capital is floating much freer in other parts of the world than with us. And what I'm hearing most from the left of the parliament is a request for a Tobin taxation on top of the existing regulation. And that wouldn't help us distributing the investments in Europe. I believe that markets should be as free as possible and with as little friction as possible. And I think simplification is the way to go.
And if I may, last question, Ms. von der Leyen, we don't have a banking union. We have regulatory banking union, but not a common market for banks. Do you think we can achieve a common market for capital?
I think we have to. I mean, everybody has understood that this is one of the main obstacles we have in the European Union, the access to capital for the companies. At the moment being, we have a situation where around about 300 billion euros per year go from the European Union, for example, to investment funds in the United States. So there is now the understanding this is top priority. Actually, the Commission has put forward plans to complete the capital market union, and it's up to the member states now really to speed up and to fulfill their tasks. So we have done our job. But as I said, it's understood, and the last European Council, a huge move forward. If you look at the conclusions, you see it. Thank you.
I'm struck by how none of you mentioned state aid in your opening remarks. This has been a discussion that's been going on over the last 2 years, of course, in view of the United States IRA. What's your position on state aid? Should state aid rules remain liberalized after the pandemic, or should they be made tighter? Mr. Gozzi, to begin.
We should go back to a tighter approach, because it is clear that we have seen that liberalized state aid was absolutely necessary during the COVID crisis. We did the right thing, and I think that on this we all agree. I hope we all agree. But it is clear that if you don't develop a European approach, if you don't develop, for example, a European sovereignty fund, and also this I have to say that I heard a big commitment by the Commission, but little work, because Ursula von der Leyen committed to create a European sovereignty fund. We got something that I think is called STEP, a platform which is totally, not up to the task about, and it's not absolutely not what we need. But we need to develop a public investment strategy at European level, focusing on European common goods, focusing on cross-border investment. And I think that if there is something that even the recovery plan hasn't done enough, is to focus. And this is what we have to do.
We'll come back to that, please.
Ms. von der Leyen, do you think STEP should be more ambitious?
Absolutely. We should put more emphasis on STEP. We need such an independent fund, for example, the clean technologies. The state aid you were mentioning, of course, there was additional temporary crisis state aid because we undergo a deep transition, decarbonization, digitalization, and on top comes a crisis like the pandemic and the war, the Russian war in Ukraine. So a temporary state aid was reasonable. Now it's expiring, the bulk of it mid-year, and we go back to the normal state aid. Actually, if you look at state aid per capita, you see that there's a very interesting division. The country that spends the most state aid is Hungary.
Mr. Schmidt, what's your position on
Well, I think state aid should not lead to a fragmentation of the internal market. But I think we cannot ignore what's going on in the world, what the Americans are doing, what the Chinese are doing. So I think we have to be pragmatic here and see where are the sectors which really have to be developed, the strategic sectors. And probably they will not develop without some public support. But the point is always how to differentiate between countries. That's why, first, I think we need more common financing. Second, we need also more common projects in these areas, which then does not lead to this fragmentation, or I would even say frustration on the side of some countries saying, well, this is only for the bigger ones or for the northern ones and so on. So I think we have to have a pragmatic approach, as we had during the crisis.
Thank you very much.
Because the crisis is going on, by the way.
Thank you very much. Did you have any other question on state aid? If I may move on then a little bit on some of the social aspects that you talked about. Mr. Gozzi, you talked about a single market for all. What do you mean What do you mean by that?
First of all, I was focusing on an issue which is underestimated, and the fact that there are still obstacles within the single market across the border. Because the mayors of Nice cannot cooperate with the mayor of Ventimille on circular economy. They cannot cooperate on public transport because there are rules which are different for the two countries and there are obstacles. The cross-border workers of France sometimes cannot leave their kids in the crash in Luxembourg. I think that and there are rules that prevent them. So there are a set of these obstacles which we should remove, and we could increase our growth and increase our job. And it's not the figure which I gave you are not my figures, are the European Commission figures.
Thank you, Mr. Gozzi.
Mr. Schmidt, you had a response there to Mr. Gozzi.
Yeah.
Well,
the crash.
First, I would say there's one issue. If we keep 27 national regulations, as it is proposed by one of our debaters here, we will have more regulation and not less. So it is important to harmonize. And I would say the best way how to harmonize is mutual recognition. That's, by the way, what the law pushed very much for. Now, on the crèche, there has been an opening because, for obvious reasons, because if you want to attract people from the other side of the border, you have also to make some concessions or openings to give people the right social rights. And that's, by the way, also very European, because European citizens should have the same rights.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ms. von der Leyen, their pragmatism dictates that we need to have some industrial policy given what the rest of the world is doing, even at the expense of cohesion?
Cohesion is enshrined in the treaties and it's at the core of the European Union. So cohesion is something which is very precious and we should work with it. What we can do is we can learn lessons on cohesion from this mandate, what went well and what went not so well. We had a report on cohesion and the results of cohesion. And there, for example, there is the proposal to have more incentives with the investment that is coming. So to have reforms and investment. And I think this is something where we should look into, because we saw that Next Generation EU with that principle was very successful and delivered. So cohesion, as I said, enshrined in the treaty at the core of the European Union, but we can always improve.
Thank you.
I want to talk about competitiveness and competition policy in general. Do you think we should be making competition policy more amenable to creating European champions or national champions? Mr. Vistisen.
I think it's a fundamental flaw that we are not seeing the international competition. I think the DG Comp in this mandate has stopped too many mergers of companies going together, making European competition less likely to make it on the world stage. I think we fundamentally need to reform our competition policy. But we also need not to repeat the mistakes of other countries. What we are doing right now and talking about is to create more debt to use for state subsidies. That is what the American has been trying for 30, 50 years. And what we have seen is it's impossible to stop this debt when politicians have begun. So we need to end it before it gets out of control.
Ms. von der Leyen, would you agree with that statement?
With that statement?
Correct.
No. So I was just thinking about what your principles are. And, you know, the question was about champions, yes or no, in the European Union or elsewhere. And what we have to do is our competition policy has to look at the global market, because these are our competitors. So, of course, we need fair competition rules within the single market, but we have to be also very clear that competitors outside have to play by the rule in our single market. So sometimes if we need champions to compete globally, that's fine for me. Fairness is the one that I want on the social market economy here in the single market of the European Union.
Mr. Schmidt, do you agree?
Well, if you take the 21st biggest tech companies in the world, there is no European. So I think this is really an issue. And that's why we really have to have this European dimension to create big and strong global companies. And this is also some good cooperation over the borders. It's also probably a stronger role for the European side to help these big companies to emerge, to be competitive on the global market.
Even at the expense of smaller European companies?
No. Small and big can very well live together. That does not exclude. I think I'm very much supporting SMEs. I think SMEs are really the bottom and the foundation of our economy. But we need also the big companies, especially also to bring our global role stronger, to make our global role stronger.
Final remark on this topic.
I'm very pleased by what Nicolas Schmidt just said, that he cares about SME, because the socialist group hasn't cared at all about SME during this term. Every time we had to save SMEs, we wanted to apply the same rule to SME or the Digital Service Act like the big tech. We want to apply the same rule to SME like artificial intelligence like at the big tech. On due diligence, you wanted to apply the due diligence rule to the small SMEs, whereas we wanted, your commission wanted to apply only to the firm with 500 employees and more. So it's very good that now, Nicolas, you say that you say that you defend the SMEs. Know that your group hasn't defended the SME in the parliament.
Thanks so much. This is the kind of energy we want on the stage. Now that we've heard from our speakers on this topic, let's take a quick look at the Slido results. Let's hope you think the single market does matter. Otherwise, we've just wasted 20 minutes. That's not what we're looking at. There we go. Fantastic. Product and services is the most important aspect. Thank you so much, Maria.
Wonderful. We are now moving to the second set of issues on a topic that I am sure will have a huge priority in the next 5 years, and that is one of economic security. Again, we start by asking first the audience an important question, and you have again the opportunity to vote in Slido. For those of you who have joined us just now, choices for EU. And the question that we would like to pose to our audience is the following. What is the most important aspect in ensuring economic security? Tough borders, energy independence, protectionist trade measures, domestic supply chains, or strong defense. You can vote now here or if you are online. Let's see the first reactions as they're coming in. If you can put them on screen, please.
Strong early leader. Now to our speakers. We've seen how Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the growing trade war between China and the US, and the evolution of new technologies has exposed the EU's frailties. How should the EU go about establishing economic security? First, Mr. Schmidt.
Well, first, I think security is a general concept. It's about economic security, it's about defense, but it's also internal stability and cohesion. So what we have to do first on economic security, we should really not be protectionist, but we should not be naive. So that's fundamental. If there is a strategy coming from one country just to take over the market in some strategic technology, we cannot just sit there and look how it happens. So that's the first thing. The second one is about strategic goods. We have seen during the COVID crisis how sensitive our automotive industry was because we could not get the semiconductors. And we could not going on building cars because there were no semiconductors. So we have to have a strategic view about our security, economic security on a certain number of issues. Same thing applies to pharmaceuticals, for instance. And energy, obvious. And the only way, energy is key. It's central for the further development of Europe, for our security, for our autonomy. And that's why the only way we can do it is invest massively in renewables.
Thank you so much. Mr. Vistisen, you have 90 seconds.
EU was built on a dream of open markets and free trade. That was the promise that was made. EU skepticism back then was a socialist thing where they criticized the capitalistic free market. Today it comes from the conservative right because EU have turned into a socialist nightmare with too high tariffs, massive state aid, and a dysfunctional and broken internal market. We have to return to the time where we can make free trade agreements with friendly nations such as the US, Southeast Asia, and South America. But we can also not be naive in this world. For decades, we have ignored the threat from especially communist China. That has to come to an end. China needs to be pushed out of all critical infrastructure, and it needs to be pushed out of our children's social media platforms. That is why we want to have a ban on TikTok, like the one proposed and adopted by the US Senate and President. A ban where we say to TikTok, either you sell your company to a Western firm or you get kicked out of Europe. We have to get serious about our security and our independence when it comes to issues such as energy. I think the Energiewende and the phasing out of nuclear power has been devastating for the energy mix in Europe, and one of the biggest mistakes of this generation of politicians. We need to turn back the tides and embrace energy independence over green ideals.
Thank you so much. Ms. von der Leyen, you have 90 seconds.
Yes, for economic security, I want to mention 3 topics. The first one is, of course, economic security means be competitive. We just spoke about it, so I do not have to go in depth. The second lesson we learned from the crisis, that is the pandemic and the Russian war in Ukraine, that is we need to have access to raw materials, access to energy, access to technologies, and to markets. And this is the topic of stable and secure and diverse supply chains, so no dependency on a single supplier. But then we also have to look at the risks that are coming from outside to the European Union. And this is, for example, overcapacity produced somewhere else, flooding then our market with artificially cheap products. Or, for example, the topic of forced technology transfer, or unfair barriers our companies experience in other markets. So this is at the core of economic security. The remedies is, first of all, dialogue, of course. This is the reason why last year I spoke 3 times with President Xi exactly about these topics. But, of course, also action matters. And this is the reason why we have developed a whole set, a toolbox of trade defensives, and we are willing to deploy them. To be very clear at the end, we believe in competition because it makes us better, but it has to be fair. And this is true for the companies in our single market, but it's also true for companies that are coming from outside to our single market.
Thank you so much. Mr. Gozzi, finally.
Well, first of all, let me recall that the 2 main answers to the need for more security came first from Emmanuel Macron, because the recovery plan would never seen its birth without the push of our leader at Renew level, and from Thierry Breton with the vaccine plan. So I want to recall that, yes, when there is a strong political will, we can provide security, economic security, and security. It is clear that the world is changing. The time where we could produce our product in China, we could import our energy from Russia, and we could delegate our security to the US is over. And it's clear that this means that we have to focus much more on industry defense. I recall again the need to create this European Sovereignty Fund. I recall also our proposal to create a 100 billion euro plan for the defense industry, which is also a growth strategy, the proposal of Kaja Kallas and of other Renew members. We have to be, I agree with the other speaker, less naive. If the Chinese or other partner reserve their public tenders to their company, I don't see why we shouldn't apply reciprocity and reserve our public tenders to our company. And also we have to say yes to free trade, but not to unfair trade. So, I mean, we have to impose to those who want to sell us their product the same rule, green rules, social rules that we impose to our firms and to our farmers.
If I may perhaps refer to what no doubt is the elephant in the room, and that is China. And no doubt China will feature in a discussion today. But let me start with a quote that we heard today in Germany from Senator Yellen asking for the EU to align itself for the US. Last week we heard about trade tariffs. I start with you, Ms. von der Leyen. Do you believe that the EU should align itself with the US when it comes to China?
So we share some of the concerns of our counterparts, but we have a different approach, much more tailored approach. The US has put blanket tariffs on many products, but we have launched an investigation, I think it's 8 months ago, according to WTO rules. So the investigation is still ongoing, but should be confirmed what I expect, that such subsidies exist, then I can guarantee that the level of the duties we would impose is correspondent to the level of damage. So much more targeted, much more tailored. This is our approach.
Thank you very much. Mr. Vistisen, can I ask the same question to you?
Already when I entered into Parliament 10 years ago and went to the USTR trade representation in Washington, they warned us about China, about stealing of intellectual property rights, about state subsidies in an illegal manner. So I think we've been falling asleep at the wheel here. And it doesn't help the industry that is suffering right now, the German car industry, the wind farm industry, that we might put on tariffs when the 8 months or 10 months or 1 year has passed. I think it's already clearly shown that China is not living up to its international obligation when it comes to trade. I think it's quite clear that there is an unfair trading practice. I think we need to get out ahead of this and try to keep up with the Americans. We have to stand united to push back the Chinese economical expansion in the world.
So you're arguing that we should unite with the US when
Yes,
it comes to China?
of course.
Thank you. Mr. Gozzi, the same question to you.
Well, first of all, I'm pleased with what I said, because on something he wants a more united Europe, which is already a breaking news, compared to what you say and you vote in the European Parliament. It's good. And by the way, I don't know if there are socialist rules, but if we can take action against TikTok in Europe, it's because of the Digital Service Act, Digital Market Act. I'm not sure you voted for those. They are not socialist rules. They are rules who allow us to protect our interests and our market. But it is clear that China has totally violated, in my view, the spirit and the rule of the World Trade Organization. So it is clear that on this, we need to provide ourselves with the instrument, the means to better protect ourselves and to better ensure that the trade is fair and not unfair. So, I mean, we have to defend ourselves because the Chinese policy is more and more aggressive, and we have to understand that it's time to answer. I have to say, and I say it also, I mean, of our friend, the common friend, John Podesta, who was at the origin of the Inflation Reduction Act, that even the Inflation Reduction Act doesn't really help the WTO rules.
Thank you
so
very much.
I mean, also with the Americans, we should have.
Thank you so much. So
let's have a talk, as you say.
Well, we are having. Mr. Smith.
Well, first, I think what the Americans are doing, they are doing it in a very special context of electoral campaign. Also, we should not forget. Second, well, there is a good example. The Chinese offered on a big project in Romania on solar panels. The Commission started an inquiry, which was leading in a very short period, showing that the Chinese were dumping the prices. What happened? The Chinese withdrew. This shows clearly that we need more efficient procedures. We have to be much more fast. We have to be more bolder also on these issues. Third point is, well, that's perhaps an illusion, but I think we should really try to rebuild some kind of trade order worldwide, because otherwise we will enter in the coming years into real trade wars, which will be bad for Europe, but also bad for all the others.
Thank you.
Can I ask all the panelists, do you believe we are in a trade war already with China? Start with you, Mr. Gozzi.
We are aggressed by China, and the measure that we've taken, and about which the Commission has done a very good job, on subsidies, on a transfer of know-how, they are totally necessary because I think that the Chinese has more and more an aggressive attitude and more a divide and rule attitude with Europeans. There are unfortunately some Europeans which are particularly sensitive to the call for Beijing, and this is very dangerous for our strategic interest and also for a proper and good functioning of the single market, which remain the main engine of our growth, by the way.
Mr. Schmidt, are we at war already with China in a trade war?
Well, you may call it a beginning of a war, or at least there's a risk for escalation. And again, this would harm the whole world economy, including the Chinese, the Americans, and Europe, and especially also the developing countries. So there is an urgency to rebuild something. Now, I know it's not easy, especially also it depends on what happens in the US in the coming months.
Ms. von der Leyen, the same question.
No, I don't think that we are in a trade war. I have given the motto, de-risk, not decouple. And I think here it's very clear we are in the category of de-risking from China. We have decoupled from Russia. So that's very clear. Russia decoupling, but China de-risking.
Mr. Vistisen, I know your original remarks said that we were already at war with trade war with China, but I wanted to come back to Mr. Gozzi's point. How would you stop China without these regulations that you say the EU shouldn't have any more of?
Of course, trade competence is an exclusive European competence, so as long as it stays that way, EU has a responsibility of how they use that mandate. But the reason that we cannot do much about the Inflation Reduction Act is because we don't have a trade deal with the US. If we had had a trade deal, these things would be regulated. We were not able to give unfair competition. We would not do it on our corona subsidies for borrowed money. They would not do it on their green policies for borrowed money. That would benefit both sides. The difference between the relationship to US and China is if it's fundamentally a friendly regime or not. China is not. And therefore, we have to use the full arsenal that we have in the WTO to limit China's economic expansion in Europe, in the rest of the world, and to the US.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith?
Well, I think the US have not always been very kind to Europe either, so especially in the past years. So certainly they are an important partner, economic partner, security partner, but sometimes they have shown really also their teeth towards the European Union.
Please, Maria.
So if I may bring then this issue of should we do it bilaterally or should we try and attempt to restore multilateralism? And what would you do to get there, Mr. Smith? Following up on what you just said.
I think that at the end, everybody has to realize that if we entered into some kind of a trade war, globally speaking, Chinese versus US, US versus China, imports coming from China to Europe because they cannot go into the US market. I think at the end, the big players, because there are other players also, there are the developing countries, India, for instance, and others will notice that this is not the right way to manage the world economy. And here Europe should play a more important role and really push for and work on some new ideas. We will not come back to what has been in the past, but we have to rebuild something.
Well, we've tried the multilateral many times, and in the meantime, we are losing competitiveness. How should we go about it?
You can see it in the relation China and the United States and us. Where China is concerned, we have been very tough, for example, on medical devices. We now started an international procurement investigation to use that instrument because we see barriers of our medical devices to access or not access the Chinese market. We have built the wind package to defend our wind industry against China, and this was very successful. With the United States, we have a much more balanced relationship. They are our biggest ally and trading partner, and we can speak with them. We have negotiated, for example, after the Inflation Reduction Act, that the guidelines show that our EVs, our batteries, are being treated as if they were from Canada or Mexico. So, like friends, you can do a lot with your like-minded partners, and this is a typical example. China is not like-minded, so we have to take our defense tools, trade defense tools.
Thank you.
Just one word. There's one important word. It's reciprocity.
I want to talk about migration and its relationship with economic security. Do the panel think, do the contestants, think that migration is a
pathways and European economic quota link to the need of our single market, linked to our labor need, linked to the skilled workers and not skilled workers that we need. And you cooperate also with the country of origin. Migration can be a very important ally in boosting our growth.
Mr. Vizis, and I see you shaking your head.
I think illegal migration is the biggest threat to European...
I didn't ask about illegal migration.
No, but it's a broad question. Illegal migration is the biggest threat to European cohesion that we are facing this year. It's out of control. More than 1 million people last year, 1 million the year before that. Legal migration can be beneficial if it's well regulated, if it's tailored into the workforce where it's needed, and I think that is best decided on a national level. Where you can see the bottlenecks in your own economy and you can expand from there. And I think, again, the Danish case is quite compelling. Our migration numbers is equivalent to the ones of Canada, but we have managed to control it with blue card and green card arrangements that makes for a much more well-regulated and orderly migration that we are seeing other places.
Ms. von der Leyen, would you agree that irregular migration has been too high in recent years into the EU?
So we had last year 1 million applications for asylum, but we also had 3.7 million legal migrants coming to the European Union, and this is very good, and we need more of this. In other words, we are very clear that we say we will fulfill our international obligation without any question. But it's us, the Europeans, who decide who comes to Europe and under what circumstances, and not the smugglers and traffickers. So fight the human smuggling, establish legal pathways, and then we have a control on migration that is beneficial for the European Union, but also for the people.
Thank you. Mr. Schmidt, does your party believe that the steps taken under the current Commission are creating those legal pathways enough?
Well, first, I think everybody agrees that we have to control migration. We cannot just accept that everybody who wants to come into the European Union is free to come. But we have to make a distinction between asylum seekers. We have to make a distinction with refugees, values, protection of refugees. That's one thing. The second one is about legal migration. Yes, we have started to open legal migration pathways. We have created a platform for legal migration, working with member states. And I see that even those who are very reluctant to talk about migration, they go around the world and try to attract thousands and thousands of migrants from Asia or from other places. So there is an acceptance that Europe needs migration. We have to organize it with our values, with our principles, and I think this is the basic And I think the pact is
Thank
more
you
or
very
less
much.
in fine.
Thank you very much for this. We need to close the round. And before we close the round of questions, I want to go back to our audience and see whether their opinion has changed. Energy independence was the most important thing before we started this debate. It still remains the most important thing.
1% believe that tough borders are important to economic security. Very interesting. We move on to our third and final round of today on the EU budget. Before we hear from the speakers, let's give our audience another chance to have their say with a slightly different twist. This Slido is a word cloud where we're asking you to please tell us which aspect of the EU budget should be increased: transport, agriculture, defence, whatever else you like. Maria.
We now turned to...
Yes, if you spell it differently, it won't know the same word.
We turn back to the candidates here, and we want to ask, of course, an important question. One of the most important jobs as a Commission President, if you were to be appointed, is to draw up the next MFF, the Multi-Annual Financial Framework, which is effectively the EU's budget. In your view, what needs to change in the MFF? Does it need to increase? And if we were to increase, how should we pay for this? And perhaps do we need to cut on anything? And this time we start with Mr. Vistisen. Your 90 seconds start now.
The EU already have a huge budget of 1,000 billion euros per budget term. It is clearly enough if you are willing to prioritize within it. We have shown the willingness to do so with our suggestion to fire 10,000 employees of the European institutions. Today I can be more concrete. We further want to abolish half the bureaucratic EU agencies and to give the money back to the European people and also the freedom from these restraints. Therefore, we don't want to take a single penny more out of the pockets of the European taxpayers. We don't want to have any more European debt taken on behalf of our children and grandchildren. The European Union is, in our opinion, already too big and too bureaucratic. And that's the major problem we're going to face with the MMF. We know that reform will be hard and difficult. We know it's mostly a frozen conflict where the common agriculture policy and the cohesion funds is filling up a lot. But we need to be honest with the voters. If people and states really believe we should have 8 to 10 new membership countries within very few years, then it's not sustainable to organize the budget in the way that we have today. So we need to make a choice, a clear choice to the electorate. Do you want to slim down the European budget, or do you want to abolish the big Eastern expansion that are now talked about in Brussels?
Thank you. Ms. von der Leyen?
So I think 3 points I want to mention. The first one is there is not one European budget, but you have several steps depending on the crisis we meet. I have negotiated 5 steps, actually. The first was the budget itself. The second was SURE, that saved us 40 million jobs during the pandemic. The third one was Next Generation EU, the 800 billion investment plan, investment and reform, that helped us to recover rapidly from the lockdowns. The fourth one was Repower EU, our answer to Putin's blackmail with energy. And finally, we had the first ever midterm revision to support Ukraine. So there are several steps. Second point, how to approach the next MFF, the next budget. I think it is paramount that we first define priorities. What are your priorities? Is it defense? Is it security? Is it climate change? Is it digitalization? Is it cohesion? Is it health? We have to define what are the priorities, which we want to fund with common European money. And then there are 2 ways to fund it. One is national contribution, and the other is new own resources. The third element is the lessons learned from this budget. We need more simplicity. Today, we have programs that are too complicated for our SMEs to access the funding. We have too many programs that invest in the same topic, but with different eligibility rules, with different timelines, with different reporting requirements. So if I want to cut on time and complexity, make it faster, leaner, and better.
Thank you, Ms. von der Leyen. Mr. Gozzi?
I think you cannot drive toward the future looking at the rear view mirror. We cannot face the future challenges, including the continental unification, with a structure of the budget which is basically conceived still in 1988. So I think that we have to abandon the 1% dogma, and we have to make clear choices on security, on green transition, on digital transition, and we have to work much more on own resources. We have strongly supported the carbon adjustment mechanism, the revision of the emission trading scheme, but we have to do more. We have to go further. I mean, on looking at bio-waste, cryptocurrencies, food waste, new fair border mechanism. This is what we have to do, because otherwise you cannot do more with less. And you cannot say that you want to do more starting with cutting. There is one thing that we have to strengthen and to expand, the rule of law conditionality mechanism. I think that we have started, but we must be much more demanding on how we link the budget to the fundamental respect of rule of law and fundamental freedom. We are just at the beginning as far as we are concerned.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Mr. Schmidt.
Well, I think it's always useful to recall the numbers. The European budget is 1.2, a bit less than 1.2 of European GDP. So it's not enormous. Now, I have seen the Bruegel studies, I've seen other studies going up to 2%, because defense is not for free. Security is not for free. And transition, and we all know that this is indispensable. And the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking. So this means that we have to have the right instruments. You mentioned SURE. I remember very well when we decided to gather SURE. This was quite rapidly done. So we have to be more flexible also. When there is a major problem, we have to create the financial instruments to face these problems. Is it defense? Is it employment? Is it education, skilling, and so on? So I think it's not alone about the budget. It's about our capacity to invest. The future of Europe is decided at the level of investment. Either we are capable of investing, private and public, obviously, or we are not. And if we are not, well, we will lose. We will lose in the global competition. And that's why I think we have to reflect on flexible methods and own resources. I fully agree. We need more own resources. We need stable resources. This is key.
Thank you so much. A number of you talked about new own resources, maybe finding new financial mechanisms. Are you saying that we're going to have to go back to voters and ask them to pay more money? Because that's ultimately where the EU budget comes from, in whichever form it takes. Mr. Gozzi, are people ready to pay more to Brussels?
I think that you have to set principles which are also consistent with your priority and policy objectives. I mean, I give you an example. You pollute, you pay. You are neutral, you get breaks. This is the way we have to work. We have done it. We have begun to do it, but we have to continue. So the own resources must be linked to favor behavior which are consistent with our common policy objective. And we have to look also on new possible resources. I mentioned bio-waste, food waste. I mean, do we want bio-waste? Do we want food waste? No, we want to reduce them. A way to reduce them can be rules. Another way to reduce them can be using the financial means. This is the way, in my view, we have to approach it.
Mr. Schmidt, you cited the Bruegel study about 2%. I mean, that would put huge strain on already tight budgets.
Well, I think that the issue is a common spending better than national spending? Because it's not the question, well, we spend or we do not spend, having talked about security, transition, and all these issues. So if we can spend better together, well, we should give us the means to spend together. I think this is the big issue. And I think if citizens understand that if we pool our spending, if we are pooling our resources to make better results, well, they agree. I think people are rational, and they will agree and support if they notice the results. So I think this is the decisive element. We have mentioned SURE. We have mentioned Next Generation. I hear what Mr. Draghi says about 500 capacity, financial capacity of 500 billion. Well, I think this is at the level of our challenge.
But can I maybe follow up on exactly this, Mr. Schmidt? I mean, do you believe that experience shows that common spending is better spending?
In many cases, yes, I believe, yes.
Mr. Vistisen, you don't think that. Have you costed how much money would be saved by sacking 6,000 people and reducing half of the institutions, or is that just a...
But I think we should not stop there. I think when we look at the two
I asked you, have you costed it? How much would it
I have
save?
not costed it down to the euro cent, but it's a good beginning. But the two largest items on the European budget is the Common Agricultural Policy and the Regional Development Fund. If it was true that spending together was better than spending each individual country, then we should have the most competitive agriculture in the world. If it was true, we should have no depraved regions back in the European Union that is lagging behind, especially in the older membership countries who have been members for more than 30 years. But in both cases, when we look at the numbers, we don't have the world's most efficient agricultural sector. We don't have, for instance, in Greece and parts of Spain and other places, developed the economy on the same level as we are seeing in other countries with the same time in the European Union. So that's the argument against
Thank you very
common
much for
spending.
this.
One
Can I say
very
something
live...
else?
Of course, sir, please.
I mean, have you seen how Spain, Portugal, or Poland managed to grow thanks to the cohesion policy? How can you say that the cohesion policy has helped a very important economy to grow? I mean, how can you say that common agricultural policy hasn't helped a big agricultural power like France and Italy? Without common agricultural policy, there wouldn't be any more agriculture, neither in France nor in Italy. So if there are two success stories, this one, I'm very surprised that, I mean, you don't have the real figures, but look, I give you an advice. Look at the growth rate of Spain and Portugal since they joined the Union. Look at the growth rate of Poland, and you will change your mind on cohesion policy.
I'm going to come to Ms. von der Leyen.
Yeah.
You do have the figures. Mr. Gozzi just said he didn't. I mean, you work with them every day. Do you think that EU spending is the most efficient way?
I want to reflect on this one because what is the principle? For example, defense. Yes, we know at the moment we see a high-intensity conventional war coming back to Europe. So we have to prepare our air defense and we have to prepare our land forces for that. And then the question is, what do we want to do on a common European level? I would advocate, for example, for an air defense shield as a common European project. If the answer is yes, then we have to provide the funding. And again, either national contributions or new own resources. What agriculture is concerned, we are now in the strategic dialogue for the future of agriculture. There we have the agriculture, the environment, the scientists, the food chains, the banking system together, developing their ideas how we can get to climate neutrality. And this should then be reflected in the budget, the next budget that is being negotiated.
Thank you very
so
much.
we share the same goals and we define the way to go there.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Wittson, you wanted to jump in on this topic.
Yes, because I had the pleasure to serve in the Budgetary Control Committee for 2.5 years, and I visited, for instance, Greece. Let's look at the metro building in Thessaloniki. I did mention Greece.
You mentioned Greece. I mentioned Spain, Portugal, and Poland.
Yeah, but then
No.
I would be happy
Have
to
you
go
been-
back
have you- have
to
you
the
been there?
Budgetary Control Committee
Have you
and
been-
visit
have you been
Spain,
to Spain or
Portugal,
Poland?
Thank you very much.
Mr. Gozzi, let's
But
let
if I can make my point as well,
Please, yeah.
I would say it took 21 years, and when we went down there, not one of the metro stations was completed. When we went to visit the highway building built by European funding, the length of the highway had been cut in third, and they still couldn't make it in time. So that is what happens when we go and control the cohesion spending. And I will be happy to go both to Portugal and Spain with the Budgetary Control Committee in the future as well.
Very good. Go.
Thank you for the invitation.
Please, Ms. von der Leyen.
I think one sentence. We just celebrated 20 years of accession of 10 member states. Look at their growth rates and the prosperity and the satisfaction of people. That is the proof.
I want to come back to the budget discussion. Some of the things we've talked about here, air defense, more investment in regions is expensive. One proposal that's being circulated is a new round of joint debt, similar to the Repower EU program, that would focus on defense. Are you in support of that, the entire group? Ms. von der Leyen first.
I come back to my principle, whether you're speaking of debts or not debts. Whatever is financed in the European Union, two sources, national contributions, if you don't want that, new own resources for the European level. This has to be the choice. It's a sovereign decision of the member states. But if they want to have a common European project, this is the way to go.
I'm going to ask it specifically. President Macron has said we should raise 100 billion in joint bonds. Do you agree with that discussion?
First, I would ask what for? What is the project? What are the priorities? And how do you want to fund it? Is it national contributions or is it new own resources? The proposal of the Commission is on the table for the new own resources. It has to be worked on by the member states.
Mr. Schmidt, do you think we should borrow more debt collectively?
Well, I'm not somebody who says we can just leave debt up to the sky. But it is clear if we want to have a European defense it will not be possible without some European indebtedness. So 100 billion, I do not know exactly what the amount should be. That has to be studied. But it is not for free. We have to explain that also to our constituents. These are things which are not for free. So I think, yes, we need some investment capacity in different areas. If we are talking about defense industry, for instance, well, we have to build it up really European-wide. If it's European-wide, there has to be also European financing. And by the way, the Commission is not just listening to the member states. It sometimes has to tell member states in which direction they should go. If they don't, that's another problem.
Thank you,
Mr. Gozzi, if you're president of the European Commission, would you be telling the member states they should be borrowing more for defense?
I would say that if you want a real European defense and real strategic autonomy, you have to spend better and you have to spend more. To spend better with common standard, common acquisitions, common tender, because that develop a European industry, and you have to spend more. And if you spend more together with the defense bond, like Kaja Kallas, Emmanuel Macron, Thierry Breton, so all is made in Renew Europe, propose, I think we would be much better off in terms of resources to build up a truly European defense industry. Without a defense industry, you forget about European defense.
Sure. And finally, Mr. Vistisen.
No, I think it's a wrong trajectory to start borrowing money. It's a never-ending cyclist. We fought for decades to avoid this. Then the COVID crisis came along and the ties broke down. And now we are seeing that every time you cannot get the member states to cough off the money, then you say, let's borrow some more. And that is fundamentally the biggest problem in the American economy, in economies in many countries, including some European economies. So why should it change that we start borrowing on a European scale? If you're not willing to finance your priorities at the voting booths, then you should maybe rethink them. And if you're not willing to persuade the Europeans that they should pay up for whatever priorities you want to include, then you should rethink them instead of just borrowing on behalf of our daughters and sons.
Maybe we should come then to priorities. Can I just start with you, Ms. von der Leyen? What are the priorities that the next budget should finance?
So for sure, defense and security is in. For sure, competitiveness and decarbonization and digitalization is in. These are some of the priorities, but we have to discuss on the European level with our leaders how wide the common European priorities are. Of course, topics like agriculture, topics like cohesion will play a role without any question, but we have to focus on what is the most important at the moment being it's stabilize our democracies, fight for strong democracy and a strong Europe. It is a very clear prosperity that is bound to competitiveness, and it is security that is also including defense.
But what can we do? What do we have to do less in order to do these? To do more on defense?
So there are other topics that had a big importance in the past that do not have this importance anymore. So it's a question how to allocate the money. And as I said, I think we can have a much more efficient budget, which is much faster delivering. A euro you spend today has a much bigger impact than a euro that you spend, the same euro that you spend 3 years later, because you're too slow. So a lot is also in delivering and taking away redundancy and looking really at the effectiveness and the impact that the money has.
Thank you. Mr. Schmidt?
Well, first, I agree that competitiveness is very important. But what do we understand by competitiveness? It's also investing in good health, for instance. It's investing in good housing. It's investing in education. It's investing in good infrastructure. If we have very, very bad digital infrastructure, you can have the best companies, they cannot operate in Europe. So I think we have to have the broad idea of competitiveness. And this is public and private money, which we have to channel into this idea of competitiveness. Would not repeat what Krugman said one day about competitiveness. But I think this is key. Now, what could we cut? Well, everything goes together. And I think we have to see, I agree, to spend better, absolutely. I think there is margin for better spending.
Thank you so
but
much.
this
Thank
will
you.
not be the decisive element.
Thank you. Mr. Gozzi?
Security, digital, green transition, certainly focusing much more on investment with a real cross-border dimension in nature. I think that if there is a weakness of the next generation EU, that is to focus within national boundaries. We have to promote to bring a real European added value, more transnational investment. And I said, you don't cut the budget, you increase it. You increase with own resources, because you cannot be serious when you say that you want to do more on defense, more on industry, and then you want to keep the structure of a budget which, I repeat, has been conceived in 1988. I cannot even remember what I was doing in 1988. I think it was at the high school. I mean, come on. I mean, that is what we have to do, and we have to make a fight to convince, to persuade member states to go toward this direction.
Mr. Visten, what are your priorities?
My priorities is to try to live within the means that we are given, instead of all the time just expanding the budget. And that's been the tendency ever since I joined the political debate here in Europe. Every time there is a new problem, there's no talk of prioritization within the budget. It always sent more money. And that's not the way it will work in a real economy, where you have to go ask the voters for the money, where you have to go to raise the taxes, increase the debt, or whatever. So we are living beyond our means. And if we are not able to rein that in, we are not responsible politicians. So that's my fundamental point. My priority is to spend the taxpayers' monies that we have been entrusted in the best way possible from the political landscape, and not all the time ask for more money in allowance from mommy and dad when we spend it all on something we fundamentally apparently didn't want.
Thank you so much. Let's check the Slido to see if the audience agree. Defense was an early leader, and we see defense still there, though lots of money for the Green Deal, climate, clean energy.
Innovation.
Indeed.
Cohesion.
Thank you all for going through these rounds and giving us the diverse perspectives, and for bearing with us as we jump from topic to topic. You now have a final opportunity to speak and to give your closing remarks to the audience and touch on any issues that you'd also like to raise. We'll start with Ms. von der Leyen. Thank you.
Yes, first of all, I want to thank for an excellent debate here. And I want to bring it back to three core issues. The first is the people, the second is cutting-edge technologies, and the third is geopolitics. And first and foremost, for the people, our core task is to create good jobs, to make sure that they are created, to make sure that there's social fairness, and that our social market economy prevails, because this is the hallmark of the European Union. What technologies are concerned, I want Europe to lead on cutting-edge technologies. I trust innovation, I trust progress, and I believe in Made in Europe. And finally, the geopolitics, of course, play a role. And we know the world is changing. We know that competition is getting tougher. But the single market has proven to be our safe harbor. So let's strengthen it. And I want to dedicate all my experience and all my commitment to create a strong Europe, and a strong Europe that is able to stand up for our values and our interests. And this is why I'm running for a second term. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gozi.
As we have seen also in this debate, we are in a time of power politics in the world. So either you give you the power or you're out of politics. And we have to give ourselves the power. We must become a military power. We must become an industrial power. So the first issue is to become truly powerful as Europeans, to defend our values and to defend our interests. The second, my second word is market. We need one market, one rule strategy. We must focus to do much more to dismantle all the remaining obstacles and to create a single market where we badly need it and we don't have it. Energy, financial market, and the capital markets union. The third is reform. I say that we have to abandon the 1% dogma for the budget. We have to put the Parliament and the Council on an equal footing when we decide about the budgetary future. They are not. And we need also to make it simpler. So it is clear that we have to revise the budget, we have to strengthen the budget, but we have also to open the treaty reform to be able to really face the future with all the necessary means and power.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Schmidt, your closing remarks.
Well, when Jacques Delors launched the single market, we spoke about eurosclerosis. Now it's not about eurosclerosis. It's about real threats against Europe. It's about a totally different geopolitical environment. And that's why, to face this, we have to be bold, we have to be innovative, we have to be courageous in all areas. And I think this is the big issue also. If we cannot explain to our citizens why we are doing it, then we will fail. So we need a strong debate with our citizens on the real challenges, on the real threats for their prosperity. Because what are we working on? We are working for shared prosperity for all Europeans. And a weak Europe does not guarantee prosperity for all Europeans. We will lose our prosperity. And I think this is about the future policies. It's not about pauses, because the world today does not allow pauses. The world today obliges us to go fast and also to be flexible in our rules, because we always consider our rules once for all and once forever. No, we have sometimes to change our rules, but certainly we have to reconnect, especially during this election, with our citizens to explain what is really at stake.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Witzenson.
The next 5 years' development in the European Union is going to be crucial. We have seen in this mandate unprecedented power grabs when it comes to introducing European debt. We have seen it in the area of healthcare. We are seeing it now on defense. We are looking into the largest enlargement since 25 years. It's going to come with a lot of problems, a lot of troubles. It's going to come with a huge cost and disruption of the European Union as we know it. And finally, we are seeing now talks of a new treaty, a treaty that have found support by the majority of the European Parliament, by the Commission, by big countries like France and Germany. And if some of these visions come into reality, it will change Europe in the way we know it today. When we are talking about abolishing veto rights, when we are talking about almost doubling the budget, when we are talking about a European president, a European minister of foreign affairs, we are emptying out the national states of sovereignty. And that's not my vision of Europe. And that is why we stand as the main opposition to this idea in Europe. And that, for us, is what this elections primarily is about. Do we want a Europe based on a free exchange of cooperation between sovereign member states? Or do we want a federalized United States of Europe? I'm in favor of the first. Unfortunately, the trajectory we are on is towards the second.
Thank you, sir. And thank you to all of the candidates for this dynamic and insightful debate.
Thank you.
Thank you. We also wish to thank the audience, those here and online, for watching and engaging with us. And we hope that this was informative and will help your decision making next month.
Thank you very much, and don't forget to vote. Thank you.
Take care.